Hey everyone, welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories. I hope you had a great day. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you do, please hit the subscribe button for more stories. And now let's start with the first story, shall we? It's called Old Water Tower as Emergency Shelter. This happened to my dad a few years ago. He lived in an area right along the Texas and Oklahoma border in a fairly rural area. My dad primarily worked in pipeline construction. One day, my dad noticed someone had purchased a very large property not too far down the road. Turns out that the new neighbor was actually from the suburbs around Columbus, Ohio, and had just won a lottery prize. The man hadn't won the jackpot, but had won a smaller prize around $2 million. My dad was also originally from Ohio, so he decided to say hello. A few days later, he meets the lotto neighbor, we'll call him Jim. Jim starts telling my dad about his dream to build his own self-sustaining homestead far away from the rest of society. Jim was very interested in prepping and convinced of a soon-to-come global societal collapse. He used his lotto winnings to purchase the land and begin building his homestead. My dad honestly didn't find this that odd, because many people in the area had some tendency toward independence, and those prepping shows were popular at the time. About a year later, Jim reached out to my dad to ask for help with a construction project that involves burying a large water tower in the ground. My dad is a little confused, but decided to go take a look. Turns out Jim bought an old water tower for the purpose of reusing it as an underground shelter. Jim had recently completed the build of a prefab home on his property. And now he wanted the water tower buried partially under the new home with a trapdoor built in a closet to access it. My dad immediately thought this was the dumbest thing he had ever heard. And he proceeded to tell Jim all the potential issues with his plan. Jim cut him off. He told my dad that his contractor for the home had basically told him the same. And so had several others he had contacted to try to get them to bury this water tower. However, Jim believes this was simply laziness on their part and had the utmost confidence in his plan. My dad laughed, but a day or so later, Jim contacts him again and asks about paying my dad to let him rent some construction equipment he had on his own property. My dad again goes over with him what a bad idea this is and how no legitimate crew would ever do this for him. Jim brings up using my dad's equipment and illegal laborers. My dad decides, well, if he's that determined, might as well make a few bucks off of the lotto winner. He quotes him some ridiculous price to rent his equipment and says he can ask a guy at work he knows about gathering up a crew of day laborers. Jim agrees to the crazy price, and my dad gets in touch with a friend who had a crew of day laborers. A bit later, my dad asks his friend about how the project is going. He tells my dad how nasty Jim treated the workers, how stupid the whole plan is, and how his specifications for how he wanted this built were completely idiotic. Whenever they would offer up suggestions or point out where something he wanted was wrong, he'd essentially shut them down. So they buried the water tower and built a secret entrance exactly as he wanted, knowing it was completely stupid. He mentions they only completed the job because Jim was paying them way more than they were used to making. Everyone agreed Jim was a jerk, but all the more reason to gouge your prices and take his money. A year or so goes by when my dad gets a frantic call from Jim. It had rained quite a bit, which was unusual for the area, and now the entire ground floor area of the back of his house was bowed upward about 2 feet. My dad goes to Jim's and takes a look around, realizing what has happened. Given that they had essentially just buried a large hollow object underneath his home, the rain caused the water tower to be pushed upward and right through his first floor. My dad explains the situation, and Jim immediately lost it. He started ranting about how he should have never used those laborers and how he was gonna make them come fix it. My dad mentioned how that was probably impossible, since most of them go back and forth across the border, but Jim was livid. My dad later found out from Jim that his insurance would not cover the damage to his home, because he had buried a water tower under it without telling anyone. He mentioned trying to sue the insurance company, but that went nowhere. He also tried numerous times to find the day laborers, but was told you get what you get when you hire illegal workers to do a project that would never have gotten a permit. Over the months afterward, there was a lot of fallout for Jim, and he couldn't even live in his home due to the damage. It eventually was torn down to be able to remove the water tower from beneath it. He burned through his lotto winnings pretty fast, so he didn't have anything left to rebuild it. He ended up selling the land and moving away about a year later. Lesson learned: when people want to waste their money, at least make sure you get some of it. I mean, what did he think? That his idea is better than everyone else's experience? The next story is called 40 Guys Standing in the Rain. Up until fairly recently, I worked as a camp bus driver in a major industrial area. What my duties were was to pick people up from the camp, where they lived for a certain amount of time. I would take them into the plant and drop them off at a variety of drop-off areas, then pick up anyone that was returning to the camp for their rest period. Now, there were certain designated areas for the buses to pick up and drop off. Only buses were supposed to be parked in those areas. The issue was that people would keep parking their work pickup in the bus areas and block us off. We kept asking them not to do that, but they kept doing it. Eventually it all boiled over when a high up in the company started giving us crap over picking people up out of their designated areas. We explained why we did it, and the higher up promised to do something about it, but never did. The second time that higher up gave us crap over picking people out of our designated areas, my manager told us that the next time this happened that we should let him know via radio and then just leave. So that's what I did. Now, we didn't just spring this on our passengers. We made sure that every single one of them knew that the next time it was blocked off, that the bus would just continue on its way and leave them behind. When I spread the news to my passengers, I heard a lot of laughter and could tell that they didn't believe me. However, the next day it happened again. There were pickups in our areas once again, and like the good little minion I was, I did as I was directed. I got on the radio to my manager, let him know what was happening, and left. I understand that there were a few number of interesting phone calls afterward, but we never had a problem with pickups in our areas afterward. Just following the rules must have felt so good at that moment. I am sure that everybody that saw someone parking in that parking slots afterward freaked out hard. The last story is called Don't Mess with the Farmers. This happened to an attorney that I work with regularly as part of my job. He moved from a very high cost of living area to our rural community. He sold his $2 million house, which was paid off and inherited from his grandparents, and bought 50 plus acres with a huge house in a bedroom community that has a lot of dairy farms. He always used to say how it was much better living up here, both in terms of the lifestyle and monetarily, as his $2 million house had property taxes in excess of $40,000 per year. Now, in addition to the huge house, the property was mostly fields, 40-ish acres, and had a 10 acre or so large woodlot. After he moved into his new house, the attorney was approached by his neighbor, one of the area dairy farmers. The farmer told the attorney how he had a handshake agreement with the former owner of the attorney's home. The farmer would mow the fields for hay 2 to 3 times per year and would harvest a sustainable amount of trees out of the woodlot. In exchange, the former property owner got 10% of the job wood, which was more than enough to heat the house all year long without having to run the oil boiler for anything more than hot water. The farmer wanted to keep this arrangement going, as it had worked out well for both parties for over a decade. The attorney thought the former owner was being taken advantage of and refused to do a handshake agreement. But he told the farmer to give him a week to draw up a proper contract. The farmer was not overjoyed with making this out to be more than a gentleman's agreement, but agreed to come back the following week. The attorney decided that what would be fair was that the farmer should pay him $1,000 each time he mowed the fields for hay. He thought that the farmer would feed the hay to his cows for free otherwise, completely ignoring that the farmer was using his own equipment and time to do the haying. And that the lawyer deserved 50% of the job wood, not 10. Or at least the 50% of the revenue the farmer got from selling the excess job wood, again ignoring the equipment and time investment of the farmer. As you can guess, the farmer refused. This all happened in late 2019, when the fields were rather bare and the supply of chopped wood for the house was full. Well, here comes 2020, and now the fields start looking like garbage because none of the other farmers will pay to hay the fields. In fact, after speaking with the first farmer, all of the other area farmers are unwilling to mow the fields unless the attorney pays them $1,000 per mowing. And, of course, come wintertime, the attorney's woodpile is depleted and he has to use the oil boiler to heat his entire home, costing well over $300 per month in winter heating costs. Now we come to early 2021, tax prep season. The farmer, being a good and dutiful community-minded citizen, informs the town that he did not cultivate any of the attorney's land for the entirety of 2020, nor did he know of any other farmers who did. Well, as it turns out, this is a big deal, because in our state farmland is assessed at a much lower value than a residential property, and additionally has a separate and lower tax rate. The attorney's land had previously been entirely zoned as farmland, except for the house and a few acres of lawn around it. Now the town sent out an assessor and rezoned the entire 50 plus acres as residential. This more than triples the taxable property value and imposed the residential tax rate rather than the much lower farm tax rate. The attorney was quite surprised and furiously told me and everyone else we worked with all this past week how he's going to sue the town because they now expect him to pay $50,000 per year in property taxes. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed today's stories, please hit the like button. And if you missed the last video, you can click right here to get to it. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.